Satisfy your need for happiness through your own curiosity with the Ranveer Show. Now, sir, we'll talk about the highlight of this episode, which is manufacturing. Um, the only person.
Boss, if you say manufacturing is the highlight, a lot of people will tune off.
I relay the audience's questions.
Right.
And the data tells us that people are very interested in this manufacturing-based conversation. Why? Because one of the understandings about improving your entrepreneurial skills is that you listen to what the government is saying in your country. The government is encouraging young people to get into the world of manufacturing.
Yeah.
So I've tried approaching the same conversation from multiple angles.
Right.
The only two slightly altering viewpoints that I found are one, yours, and we'll come to that, we'll expand that whole thought. The second was from Balaji Srinivasan, who's one of the leading Twitter content creators in the world. He's one of the most respected VCs who's come out of Silicon Valley, and he's one of the sharpest speakers as well as one of the deepest thinkers that I've come across on the show. He said that what people don't account for is that robotics and AI will be a big part of manufacturing going forward. So a lot of the pro arguments and the counter arguments, like for and against manufacturing, do not account for the robotics and AI angle that is going to be a part of it. Now, keeping what he said in mind as a bit of a flag post in this conversation, so I'll let you expand on this conversation that you've had in many of your interviews about how you're not as bullish on the manufacturing sector. Because the current viewpoint is a lot of first-time entrepreneurs who have made some money, who have figured out how to create businesses, are now thinking of getting into manufacturing full-time.
Right.
By just learning about the industry.
Yep.
Go for it, sir.
So I think first, to put my cards on the table, I'm not against manufacturing. I think manufacturing is an important part of what India will do going forward. What I'm against is fetishizing manufacturing, saying that's the only way to grow, and thereby underemphasizing other ways of growing, such as what you're doing. You're performing a service which is growing, which has grown really well, and is providing a good that many people consume, right? And if you look at India's history in the recent past, where we have grown in terms of jobs is services, not manufacturing. Manufacturing has been declining despite all the efforts of the government. Now, I'm not saying don't have manufacturing. What I'm saying is to think that you have to enter manufacturing at the lowest end, bring assembly into the country, then we will grow in manufacturing slowly, is missing the point. That maybe this was the way to grow 30 years ago when China got into the business. But increasingly, global supply chains are so efficiently structured, they do everything where it's most efficient to do it, right? So if you're subsidizing assembly with this PLI scheme, getting people to build, put together components in India, don't be under the mistaken impression that if you do that, suddenly a whole ecosystem will grow around that and build components, this, that, everything. As I said, we already have a fight about components within the country. That, create the environment and people will come. Some people are coming just because they want to get away from China. Apple keeps saying that. I don't know how much they're actually doing in India, but they're talking the talk and saying we'll bring a lot of manufacturing to India. Right now, they're doing assembly in India. Good. But let us be careful that the main way you get people in by creating an environment in which they can flourish. That means improve the quality of labor, so they want to hire people. Improve logistics, which the government is doing, which means infrastructure logistics. Stop changing policies every few months, right? Because business people like to have a long-term view. Don't erect tariffs one day, cut it. I mean, remember, we erected tariffs on laptops. I mean, laptops feed an entire industry as an input, which is the service industry, all those IT people. And suddenly you're asking them, like Narayan Murthy used to go to Delhi to negotiate, I want so many more laptops of this kind. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So have consistent, reasonable policies. Don't keep going back and forth. All those things will encourage manufacturing. And we will have good entrepreneurs who will set up their manufacturing. All those people you're talking about, that's great. But also recognize the world has changed. That in every global supply chain, we have assembly, which is often the lowest value-added part of the supply chain, right? The most value-added part of the supply chain typically is not assembly, but the early part of the supply chain, or the production chain, which is intellectual property. When the Apple iPhone is created, when Steve Jobs sits and thinks about how it will look, when he puts in the IP that makes it work as well as it worked when it initially came out, that's where the value is added. So Apple says designed in California, doesn't say made in California. Apple hasn't made anything since 2004. It's all been done by Foxconn. Okay? Apple's value, it takes the initial part of the design process in the production chain. It takes the last part, which is marketing it, the content, which goes through the apps and this and that. Those two it owns. It doesn't own anything in the middle, which is the manufacturing process. Because it owns those two service ends, it is worth $3 trillion on a good day. Foxconn on a good day is worth 50 billion. Apple is worth 60 times Foxconn, even though Foxconn does all its manufacturing for Apple. That's the point we're trying to make, that there are other parts. That's not to say, neglect manufacturing, but don't fetishize it. Don't give enormous subsidies to get the lowest end of manufacturing. We can move beyond that. If you subsidize but don't fix all the problems, the environment, etc., those people will leave. I mean, we had Nokia manufacturing cell phones in the country. What does manufacturing mean? It was just assembling them, putting components together. Eventually something happened and Nokia left. What was left behind? Nothing. Similarly, if we don't build the necessary underlying infrastructure and ecosystem, this could also evaporate. I'm not saying that's the first thing that will happen, but instead focusing on building the system, which means, again, I sound like a broken record, healthcare, education, etc. Then try and get the R&D, the intellectual property, the entrepreneurship, which will create strong products for Indian companies. So, how many years have we been in manufacturing automobiles? Since the early 1990s, when we, lost Ambassador, Fiat, and all that, and instead Suzuki, Hyundai, etc., took over. Has there been one distinctive Indian product which has captured the world? We make good products for India, but we haven't had one distinctive product which has. Where's our Indian Tesla? We haven't. That's what we should be ambitious about going forward. Yes, get the manufacturing, but focus on the intellectual property and design which creates Indian products that capture the world. And that requires an order of difference in how we do it, which is we need the universities, the university industry combinations, etc., which create that kind of R&D. Take Google. Google came, myth has it, from Larry Brin and Sergey Page as, doing, I think it was a PhD thesis. Who was their advisor? It was actually an Indian, a guy called Motwani from IIT Kanpur. Now, if we brought a Motwani to India, instead of emigrating because he was looking for a great university, if the great university could be in India, and Larry Page and Sergey Brin were Indian students and were devising AI algorithms of one kind or the other and created a new product. Why not? We can do that, but we need to work on it.
Do you think that this fetishization of manufacturing is because the government is trying to create jobs, and if they promote the idea of manufacturing and lots of entrepreneurs come out and say, we've now created these big factories and manufacture products, you'll also be creating jobs, so the government's problem will be getting solved. Is that the...
I think certainly jobs are at the heart of it, that we need to do something in real time. The problem, of course, is that many of our jobs are being created in the service sector. These aren't all IT jobs or consultant jobs. Many of the jobs are cleaner, security guard. those are the big service jobs that are being created. But those are still valuable jobs because they take somebody who has very low productivity in staying on the farm and gives them a better job in the city. And of course, if they come to the city and live, the kids can go to better schools, and then the next generation becomes even better. But I think that more than that, we have the ability to transform people by improving the quality of their human capital, right? 50% of our graduates are unemployable, according to a survey by WeBox. If we improve the quality of our colleges, right? If we made many more of them employable, the world is coming to India to look for these people because today those people can provide services at a distance. Today, for example, if you're doing IT, if you're doing legal services, if you're doing consulting, if a consultant during the pandemic could offer service from Denver to Chicago, they can offer it from Hyderabad to Chicago today. And that's what a lot of global firms are discovering. We need people in India. And this is what are called global capability centers, which are emerging, doing R&D, doing, Goldman Sachs has people building models for them in Bangalore. That's high quality work. So over and above Indian products, entrepreneurship, IP, owning the high end, there's a lot of Indian services which can be exported directly. Now, how many jobs will that create? A few million. The Tamil Nadu minister told me 10,000 jobs a month in these services I'm getting just off the bat. Now, that doesn't sound like much. Add it up, 120,000 jobs, but in one of 27 states. Multiply that by 10, 15, it starts becoming a serious job generation per year. But add to that each one of those jobs creates 4 or 5 jobs. That guy who gets a 15 lakh job or 20 lakh job a year is going to have, other needs, maybe a cook, maybe a maid. That generates jobs for others. Now, hopefully over time, those maids and cooks will improve their lot because they themselves, their kids will get better. So as a country, you can grow. What I'm saying is you don't just need the jobs in manufacturing. Services can also provide you a tremendous number of jobs.
Are you trying to say play to your strengths?
Play to your strengths is exactly what I'm saying. That we see the fact that we haven't grown manufacturing as a weakness, yes, but then note the fact that we've expanded in services as a strength and recognize that strength can be expanded tremendously. But, let me give you another strength, our democracy. Why don't people trust TikTok in the US today? They think the Chinese government has a way into the brains of their kids via TikTok, that they will try and manipulate them, this, that, maybe in blackmail. A lot of stuff can happen. Our democracy, and if we had strong sort of restrictions on government intervening in firms, they couldn't ask the Indian TikTok to open the gateways for the government to interfere. If we had legislation like that, our TikTok would be, respected around the world. I mean, what's a more concrete example of this? 5G. We have a Tejas, a company in the south, which is creating 5G network. Now, why don't people trust Huawei's 5G? Because they think the Chinese government will build backdoors to spy on the rest of the world. What if our government, passed a privacy law that you need a whole bench of judges and them to approve in order to try and use backdoors? And Tejas said, we're not going to build backdoors. Tejas would be a 5G network of choice for a lot of developing countries. There's a lot of building on our strengths that we can do. And we should be open to that and recognize our true strengths.
So I think traditionally our strengths have been the export of soft power. That's on yoga, Ayurveda, all these things, which are picking up in the West as well. The second would be, I think, our international friendly nature. That's at least the image that most people have. Because the only other option for this kind of a geography, this kind of population is China. People have turned away from it. So that's one other advantage that we have. The third one would probably be our intellectual capabilities.
Right.
Like this whole narrative about how the highest earning immigrant population in the US is Indian, it says something about the culture we come from also. If you combine these three, that's a likelier success in terms of business than just blindly going after manufacturing.
I couldn't agree more. I would say that, you mentioned this diaspora. I think we should make much better use of our diaspora, not just at rallies abroad or in sending remittances, but we have to recognize there's a talent pool there. Can we use that talent pool better? For example, one of the biggest problems in universities is faculty. There are not enough high quality faculty to go around. But we have sent thousands, tens of thousands of students abroad to become faculty around the world. Can we attract them back? Now, immediately the point will be, we can't pay them adequate salaries. No, we can, because we're also sending 7.5 lakh students every year abroad who are paying international rates to universities across the world. If we created universities in India of that same caliber, retain those students in India, they would pay the universities higher fees. We have to accept that for quality education, you have to pay. And it shouldn't be the government paying. The private sector universities can start up. But that payment can be done by parents who want their kids to get a global education. And these kids, once they get that world-class education, can work for multinationals at a distance, doing consulting services from, Muzaffarpur or whatever, without going, all the way to the West. So I think the point is, if you open your mind to the possibilities, there are immense possibilities. But it needs us to focus on doing some of these things and imitate the good things in China. China has built world-class universities in the span of maybe a decade and a half by bringing back a lot of talent and populating with the existing talent those universities to create really sound. When I look at students, there used to be a lot of Indian students coming for PhDs in the US. Very few now, partly because they're not interested, but also partly because they're not of the same caliber as the Chinese students who come in now. We need to create our own universities which produce students of that caliber.
A lot of my friends who've gone abroad want to come back, don't want to raise their families in the US. That's a whole other conversation.
Right.
But a lot of them are willing to come back. I think the roadblock many of them face is the salaries and their savings. But I would assume that, after you take into account the whole lifestyle cost of living in America, figure out how much money they're saving there and figure out a way to pay them such that their savings match up to the savings that were happening in the US, and a horde of Indians will come back.
That was exactly the calculation we had when we set up the Indian School of Business here. Unfortunately, what happened in the initial years of the Indian School of Business is the entrepreneurs who were putting up the money got hit by the dot-com bust, and the initial endowments didn't come. But that was exactly the calculation: match the savings, ensure they can send their kids to a good university, and people will come. And I think what this means is you have to go beyond UGC salaries. But you have to, be quite open about how much has to be paid, and it'll come back. It'll come back because people are desperate for a good education here, which is why they're sending so many children abroad.
I have a lot of hope in private universities. Like I've gone to some private universities in India. I've been to LPU. I was blown away by it. A friend of mine, Dr. Ritesh Malik, is associated with Laksha University. So I'm seeing the quality of education that's rising. I see that as a step in the forward direction.
Yes.
But I have to pull it back one last time to manufacturing, sir.
Right.
Say, just as a thought experiment, if you were the Minister of Industries and you were told by the PM, listen, we need to increase the number of manufacturing units in our country, or generally the number of entrepreneurs who take up manufacturing in our country, what would you do?
Well, you see, I think there's a broader set of issues we need to tackle, which is the quality of the labor force, whether they're trained to the right things, make more industry sort of training institution combinations, and sort of essentially ensure that they get the right people. That's one. But I would also go industry by industry and ask, what are your problems? Why are you not expanding? One of the biggest concerns I have is private investment in this country is not picking up. It's remained really low. what is lifting the economy is public investment, government investment. And that can't go on forever. It has really risen over the last few years, but it can't go on at that pace forever because we have a fiscal deficit also to worry about. So how can we get private investment? Why are you not investing more? What would it take to get you to invest more? What can I do as a government to make the framework better? Don't keep asking me for SOPs. Don't ask me for tariffs. Those are two things I'm not going to do. But if you ask me for how I can make it easier, reduce the inspector burden on you, improve the sort of your ease of getting permissions, improve common facilities. Maybe what you need is a big tool room for all you small enterprises to use in order to produce high. Maybe you need 3D printers. Let's talk about all that it would take in terms of broader support. Maybe you need easy land. Those are the things I can work on, but don't keep asking me for more and more subsidies and more tariffs. That would be the kind of conversation that you should have industry after industry. And I think over time, you will get a sense of what the big common problems are, what the specific problems are. And the problems, you fix the problem, as you said, you'll find it doesn't quite work. Then somebody will say, okay, we need, that's, to some extent, that's how we worked at the RBI. We kept trying to change and then get feedback, change again. Arundhati Bhattacharya, who was the RBI governor, used to come with a 10-page list of complaints. And he should listen and make changes.
A/B testing.
Yeah.
Of policy. I think you spoke about this in one of your past interactions. You said that China does that very well. Like they'll A/B test policies.
Yeah.
And then depending on how the policy pans out,
exactly,
they spread it across the country.
This is called crossing the river by feeling the stones. You can theorize all you want, but the theory has to hit the ground. And so you see what goes wrong with the theory when it hits the ground, and then adjust. And I think we need more experimentation, but not constant. I mean, if you constantly experiment, industry says what's going on. Broad policy, here it is. Within that policy, before rolling it out, I'll experiment to see what works best, and then I'll roll out nationwide. That kind of, being willing to see what works rather than theorizing, I think is quite important for our policy establishment.
If you enjoyed today's clip, make sure you check out these curated playlists that we've made especially for you related to the subject that was spoken about in this clip.